Please help me welcome to the stage City Council President Ben Ewen-Campen.
Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. It is wonderful to be here with you. At our inauguration 2 years ago, it was pointed out that Somerville had just elected the most diverse city council in our history. And tonight, I am happy to say that we have very much continued in that tradition. Somerville has always prided itself on being a city of immigrants. And this year, we have 2 newly elected city councilors, one of them returning, who immigrated to this country literally after winning the green card lottery, and who have now gone on to become elected officials. And by my count, between the 2 of them, Councillor Will Mba and Councillor Naima Said speak 8 languages. Incredible. So thank you all for being here to help us inaugurate this city council. Now, for those of you who have attended these inaugural speeches in the past, there's something of an informal tradition. This is my gimmick. Hold on. Thank you. There's something of an informal tradition of the council president choosing a literary theme for this speech. For example, in my midterm address last year, I based the speech around the famous Charles Dickens line, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." But you know what? I love literature, but as some of you may know, my day job is as a biologist. So this year, I'm going to be true to my roots, and I've decided to make this speech a science fair project. Thank you. And to make this official, I've brought these pieces of cardboard and some data. So, as you all remember from elementary school, for any research project, you need your question that you're trying to answer, you need observations, some data, then you need a hypothesis to explain the data, then you need to test your hypothesis, and then share your conclusions. So that is what I'm going to attempt tonight. We'll start with the question. The question that I am trying to answer is, how do we make progress in Somerville? For those of us who work in local government, this is the central question. We want to help as many people as possible in the most equitable and durable way possible with finite resources, so how do we actually do it? That's the question. Now I'm going to share some data, and I'm going to focus on 3 issues that are near and dear to our hearts: housing, safe streets, and trees. This first graph is about our Office of Housing Stability. This graph shows the number of cases that the Office of Housing Stability has handled each year. These are calls or emails or people who walk in when they're having an issue with their housing and they need help. So I know you can't see the numbers, but I hope you can see the shape of the graph. In 2017 and 2018, this office didn't exist. There were 0 calls. The first year it opened in 2019, they handled about 400 cases. The very next year was the COVID pandemic, and the number of cases that they responded to shot up to above 1,400 cases a year, and it has not come down since. If we had not created the Office of Housing Stability, there would be thousands of people in Somerville every year looking for help and not knowing where to go. That's graph number 1. Graph number 2, I want to share some data from our incredible mobility department. This is showing the amount of traffic calming infrastructure that has been installed each year since 2017. This is raised crosswalks, speed humps, curb extensions to make intersections safer for pedestrians. And as you can see, the overall shape of the graph is similar to the last one. For the first few years, Somerville was installing 0 speed humps each year, not much else. And then over the last 3 years, we see this number shoot up. And what we have now is a very consistent, robust annual investment in making our streets safer. And by the way, we also have data showing that this stuff works to slow traffic down and to greatly reduce the likelihood of injuries from traffic. Graph number 3 is about trees. So I could show you a graph of how many trees Somerville has planted every year for the past decade, and you would see a very steady increase year after year. We now set a minimum of 350 trees that we plant a year, and usually far exceed that. But instead, I want to talk about a different measure of progress, a local law that we passed a few years ago called the Tree Protection Ordinance. Before this law, the city basically had no ways to discourage cutting down trees. Even when a tree was illegally cut down on public land, our options were really limited. But thanks to this law, we now require that new trees get planted when old trees are cut down, or else significant money is paid to the city so that we can plant trees elsewhere. So this graph shows some of the effects of that law. We started getting data in 2021. The gray bars show the cumulative number of new replacement trees planted when an old one is cut down, and that number is now over 400 in 3 years. The black bars show the cumulative amount of money that we have brought in to plant new trees, and that number is now over $150,000 dedicated to the urban forest. That's all the data. Thank you for bearing with me. And I would argue, if you looked at almost any issue that is important to Somerville, we could find graphs similar to these. So to bring it back to the science fair project, now I need a hypothesis to explain these graphs. What caused all of these different measures of progress to shoot up in the last several years? This is really the whole point of the speech. My hypothesis is that the way that we have made progress on these issues and will continue to make progress on these issues is this: community organizing. And when I say community organizing, I don't mean that in an abstract, wishy-washy way. I'm talking about very real, concrete ways that people get involved in the political process at the local level. This is everything from people who email their city councilors or 311 or the mayor, show up to a meeting for the first time, to establish community organizations that advocate on a specific issue year after year, all the way up to activists who get so fed up that they decide to actually run for office. My hypothesis is that Somerville really stands out in the amount and the depth of the community organizing that we have, and that this is what allows us to make progress. Of course, there are a lot of really committed elected officials who care immensely about these, and we all love to take credit. And there are obviously amazing city staff who have dedicated their lives to moving this work forward. But to use a term from science, having committed elected officials, having talented city staff is necessary, but it is not sufficient. None of us can do our jobs without an organized community that pushes us and works with us and teaches us. That is my hypothesis. Now I have to try to prove to you that that is true. To test a hypothesis, you need to do an experiment. But I Googled it, and it is apparently unethical and illegal to do experiments on human beings without jumping through a bunch of hoops. So instead of an experiment, I'm going to do the next best thing, which is just tell you how I know this hypothesis is correct, because I have seen it with my own 2 eyes. Let's start with the Tree Protection Ordinance. This law was the direct result of community organizing. To make a long story short, in 2017, there was a massive, unauthorized clear cut of trees on Beacon Street. And to say that this caused an uproar is an understatement. There were probably hundreds of people brought into local politics for the first time from that single event. And one of these people who got really invested was a resident some of you may know, named Chris Dwan, who teamed up with 2 city councilors, Councilor J.T. Scott and Mark Niedergang, to write a new law, and that is what became the Tree Protection Ordinance. And now, thanks to the hard work of our incredible urban forestry staff who have been implementing it ever since, we now have these hundreds of new trees and tens of thousands of dollars, which would not have existed without this community stepping up and getting involved in the political process. And just a few months ago, we passed a new law called the Green Roof Ordinance that is going to require large new buildings to have plants on their roof. And in a city as dense as Somerville, this is one of the few ways that we have to really bring in new green space. Just like the Tree Protection Ordinance, this was an idea that came from the community, that was pushed forward by an incredible coalition of community groups, and this is yet another law that would not have existed without the work of organized residents. Street safety, same story. We have so many grassroots organizations dedicated to street safety in Somerville. These are people who organize enormous rallies and fill out petitions but they also volunteer to serve on our local commissions and our task forces, to advise, to advocate both inside and outside the local government. And it's impossible to imagine that this city would be making the kind of investments that we are now without this groundswell of grassroots activism. And when it comes to housing, the community organizing in Somerville is a force of nature. This is a community that has made it crystal clear year after year after year that affordable housing will always be our top priority. I could literally give dozen specific examples of what this community has led the city to do to take bold action on housing affordability, but I want to lift up two stories that jumped out to me that were shared last month when the City Council was voting to pass a rent stabilization home rule petition for the first time since the real estate lobby got it banned. As we were getting ready to take that final vote, my colleague, City Councilor Matt McLaughlin, told a story from when he was a youth organizer in Somerville probably over a decade ago. At that time, he was helping to organize a protest at City Hall because a previous city council had helped to block a new affordable housing development for homeless families on Highland Ave. And Councilor McLaughlin talked about how that protest was one of the moments that galvanized him into actually running for office. And right after that, Councilor Klingon, another of our colleagues, told his story about growing up in Somerville, living in 6 or 7 different apartments across the city, getting pushed out by rent increases. And during that time, in the 1980s, one of the many people fighting for rent control was Councilor Klingon's mom. He showed me a picture of her at a protest from that time, holding up a big sign. And he talked about how much it meant to him to be now sitting on the city council, able to take a vote, to move this work forward, to help protect people just like him and his mom and his community growing up. And the reason I bring up these stories is just to emphasize how important these protests and community movements and showing up at City Hall, how important that stuff is, even if it doesn't necessarily feel like it at the time. Okay, so back to my science fair gimmick, my conclusion, and this is my message to everyone tonight, both to everyone in the audience and everyone on stage, is that the community of people that we have here in Somerville is far and away our best resource. This coming year, we have a lot of big priorities, a lot of big challenges, and I really believe, because I have seen it with my own eyes, that the way we make progress is for more and more people to get involved in the political process, and for all of us in local government to continue to work alongside you, even when there are disagreements, even when it can be frustrating. That is how we continue to get stuff done. Making progress in local government is incredibly challenging, but it is also incredibly rewarding, just like shopping at Market Basket on a Sunday. Thank you all for being here, and Happy New Year.